Welcome to OC Tanner's Culture by Design podcast, where we discuss the research, practices, and strategies to help employees everywhere thrive at work. I want you to imagine a scenario. You work at a large multinational company, and lately things have been getting tense. The race between your organization and its competitors is heating up. Business as usual isn't going to be enough to keep you competitive. The pace of work has become faster, more distributed, and increasingly shaped by tech and AI. What your role, your team, and even your company will look like a year from now is anyone's guess. Senior leadership has made it clear. We need to innovate, evolve, and increase performance, and we need to do it now. You've also seen changes on your team. Until recently, you were part of a group of 4 and everyone was based in the same local office, but now those numbers have grown to 10, with colleagues in offices around the world. As a result, you're finding it harder and harder to genuinely connect with others. At the same time, leadership really doesn't seem to be noticing all the hard work you've been putting in recently. You're starting to feel unseen and unappreciated, with less and less voice in the work you do. What does this mean for you as an employee? Well, for starters, you can feel a sense of burnout creeping in. And despite the company-wide message of growth and performance, you're beginning to question if you can truly grow as an individual here. If things keep going down this path, you're not sure how long you'll be able to stay with the company and still maintain your well-being. This may sound bleak, but doesn't it also sound just a little familiar? It should, because some variation of this story is very much the reality right now for employees across the world. Organizations everywhere are chasing performance and investing heavily in systems for productivity and automation, yet fewer are actually committing to the systems that hold their people together, and employees are feeling it. I'm Daniel Patterson, Manager of Research and Assessment for the OC Tanner Institute, and I'm here with our principal researcher, Kristen D'Alessandro. Today, we're going to take you through the insights and findings from OC Tanner's 2026 State of Recognition Report, and along the way, we're going to try to tackle this major business question. That is, what is the ROI of recognition that strengthens workplace relationships? And what does it cost when recognition is missing or merely transactional? Now, before we jump into the report, let's take a minute to share a little bit about who we are and our connection to the state of recognition. Welcome, Kristen.
Thanks, Daniel. Yes, on a bit of a lighter note, we probably should introduce ourselves. We threw this depressing scenario at you. How do you know we're qualified to do so? So I'm Kristen D'Alessandro, and I'm a principal researcher with the OC Tanner Institute, which really means I get to work on all sorts of exciting projects like the State of Recognition Report, our Global Culture Report, and other sort of various odds and ends. I also do events such as webinars, usually with my friend Daniel here, where I get to talk about our research and how it applies to the real world of work. As far as my background goes, I have a PhD in sociology and spent some time in academia, but now I'm just out here trying to help organizations help their employees thrive.
Well, thanks, Kristen. And as I mentioned, I'm Daniel Patterson, and I oversee the IP research team for the Institute. And this means I get to work with brilliant researchers like Kristen to develop original cross-cultural studies that explore the intersection of workplace culture, leadership, and recognition, and specifically from the employee perspective. So all of those great reports that Kristen mentioned earlier. I also get to do various speaking and teaching opportunities, both with our internal teams here and with our great clients. My graduate degree is in political theory, and my professional background is, well, pretty eclectic. But the through line for all of my work and studies, and what I try to always bring to the Institute, is a passion for making complex ideas accessible, engaging, and actionable. Okay, Kristen, so now that we've got that out of the way, as the principal researcher on the State of Recognition Report, set the stage for us. What's going on in the workplace today, and why is this report so important now?
All right, setting the stage. So let's actually take a step back because I think some additional context would be helpful for situating this new report. In all of our research right now, we're really finding that productivity is on everyone's mind. And despite the default trap that a lot of companies find themselves in when it comes to productivity, you know what kind of trap I mean, I think, that push for employees to work more hours, to focus hard on the numbers, and to save well-being for another day. Despite all of this, our research has shown that the highest performing cultures don't actually ignore well-being. In the long term, that's really just not sustainable. Instead, the most successful companies are taking a more strategic approach that considers the humanity of their employees, preserves their trust, really cares about their engagement and development, not just superficially, but really cares about it. These companies also encourage collaboration. And, although we have a lot of evidence that this approach works better than the alternative, many organizations right now see automation and productivity measures above all else as their saving grace. The problem with this latter approach is that it really has the danger of ignoring the human side, how workers are feeling about their coworkers, their roles, and their organizations more generally. We need employees to feel good about these relationships rather than agitated. This is key because in order for employees to feel like they're really willing to invest their time, their efforts, their ideas, and really just themselves into the organization, they need to feel that the organization is willing to invest in them too.
Now, something you said just now I think is really important, and that's invest. And I want to unpack that a little more in context of recognition and relationships. Because when it comes to all the ways organizations can signal to their people that they're committed to their growth and development, I mean, I think we can agree recognition is a game changer. And it's not just in the personal ways we usually think about recognition. Things like, feeling seen and valued and heard, all of which are incredibly important. But when recognition is done well, it actually amplifies the interpersonal connections that have a profound impact, not just on how employees feel at work, but how they actually work at work. Strengthening connections through recognition actually clarifies expectations, fosters innovation, and encourages collaboration and performance. I mean, in other words, if leaders really want to achieve the business outcomes they want, they have to start by investing in and cultivating those meaningful social ties. And here we're talking about those ties between employees and leaders, between employees and customers or clients, and between employees and the organization itself. I mean, ultimately, social ties determine ROIs.
Yes, I like that. Social ties determine ROIs. Remember that, folks. With the stakes being as high as they are, and with scenarios like the one that Daniel described earlier being all too common, using recognition as a strategy to build social ties matters now, maybe more than ever. So, that being said, enter the 2026 version of the State of Employee Recognition Report.
Yay!
Yay! Round of applause for the report. We're really excited about this. We've been working on it and really, really thrilled to see it kind of set off into the wild. Now, this is actually our sophomore effort when it comes to this report. Last year, we introduced the first report in what we're calling the State of series as really sort of a complement to the Global Culture Report that we already publish yearly that you may have heard about. However, in contrast to the GCR, as we call it, the point of this new report is really to focus exclusively on recognition. All of those of you out there who are familiar with our culture report might know that recognition plays a part in the GCR, but it's really not always central to the focus of a lot of our findings that we cover in the GCR. So this report is doing something a little bit different. And for this year's State of Employee Recognition Report, we surveyed employees from 10 countries across the world specifically about their recognition experiences. So we could get a wide range of perspectives from the employee point of view when it comes to this topic of recognition. Now, there's a lot of great info in the report, but for the sake of time, we could probably talk about this all day if you if you haven't noticed. Daniel and I would like to share with you 3 of our favorite themes from the 2026 edition. So in each case, we'll talk a little bit about how our findings help circumvent or address some of those issues we heard about in the opening scenario. And with that, Daniel, I think we probably should just get right into it. Do you want to start us off with some of your insights? What's a key theme from this year's report that you think is really impactful and that you think might help that sort of frazzled HR person who's tasked with tackling some of the challenges we discussed in that scenario earlier?
Well, I think for me, I'd have to go back to what I hinted at earlier, and that's the idea of investment. And in particular, something you kind of touched on, that idea of mutual investment. When people think about recognition, and here I'm specifically talking about companies and leaders, they often understand it as a one-way exchange. I thank you for something you've done, usually finishing a big project or something like that. And then we all say yay and move on and keep working. The problem with that is that it's seen recognition as a transaction rather than an interaction. Recognition done right is actually a two-way exchange between employees and their organizations. So, okay, what do I mean by this? Well, when employees feel like the organization sees them for who they are and how they uniquely contribute to the work, that kind of recognition signals that I, for instance, as a leader, am invested in your growth and want you to feel part of a community. As a result, employees respond to this type of recognition with greater effort, stronger commitment, and better work. So that commitment and connection actually goes both ways.
I love it, Daniel. I think seeing recognition as an interaction would also help with the problem that we covered in the scenario earlier of employees just feeling like their manager doesn't notice them, doesn't see the hard work that they're putting in. And of course, this feeling of not being seen is the fast track to burnout.
Absolutely.
So can you tell me more about transactional recognition? What exactly does that look like?
Great question. Well, the simplest way to explain it is recognition that just checks the box. Just about every company these days understands that recognition is essential to a healthy employee experience. We've all come to understand that it's not simply a nice to have anymore, it's a must have. So what do? Typically, they buy into a platform or a program that's going to make recognition quick and easy. So lots of automation, gamification, some quick generic thank yous, boom, there. Okay, I've recognized my people. Now, unfortunately, what you've actually done here is break that key reciprocal exchange. You may have increased one-way frequency, but by making the experience impersonal and generic, you've missed that connection opportunity. And connection is the mechanism. That's what gets you from an employee that is just clocking time to an employee that feels a part of something and wants to grow and develop. Employees perform at their best when recognition connects them, not just to their accomplishments, but also to their effort and how that effort connects to colleagues and a bigger purpose. In fact, in our research, we actually found that when employees feel that their recognition program builds relationships and community, they're 7 times more likely to stay with their organization for another year, and that they are willing to personally invest in their organization's success. Now, sadly, charts and tables don't play well here on a podcast, but there's a load of fascinating data like this in the report that we found that really supports the need for integrated recognition that goes beyond the transactional and builds those social ties that strengthen meaningful connection. Because again, if you want to capture those business ROIs, you have to invest in the connections that help your people perform. Okay, that's my spiel. Kristen, your turn. What's something about this year's report that really stood out to you?
Well, first of all, I agree with everything that we just talked about. The idea of mutual investment, I think, is just so key right now, especially when we're talking about relationships between employees and the organization itself, right? In order to get the ROI, as you just mentioned, it has to feel like a reciprocal exchange. But another chapter from this year's report that I think has some really good insight and could be really helpful, particularly right now, is our chapter on what recognition can do at the team level. So as teams get larger and more dispersed and more remote in the contemporary workplace, how do we maintain the rapport, the trust, and the camaraderie needed for effective collaboration and really goal achievement? If we're looking at, a team that sets ambitious goals for itself, that team is going to have to collaborate effectively in order to reach those goals, right? And so how do we make that happen as teams get more dispersed, as teams get the workload increases? This is something that we really need to pay attention to. So, as you'll recall, the person in the scenario that we talked about earlier went from a small local team to a larger international team. So this was a really big change for them. And this is a change that a lot of employees have experienced or possibly are currently experiencing or will experience in the future. And the larger and more dispersed a team is, the more difficult it can be to establish rapport and to maintain it over the long term also. To make matters worse, our research has found that cash-strapped organizations aren't really investing as many dollars in official team building activities as they did even a handful of years ago. Like I said, we're just really concerned about productivity. And so those dollars that may have gone into team building are now being put towards other things. Daniel, did you know that from our survey, 64% of employees work on teams that are dispersed, so not working in the same office, and 35% reported regularly working with folks who live outside of their own country?
I didn't, but everything that we've studied about how the workplace is evolving suggests that teams are just going to get more and more dispersed. It's just kind of the new direction and way the workplace is going.
Right. So, these are trends that are only going to continue as we move into the future. So, we need to figure out now how to establish that team rapport and how to do it fast, which can be interesting when you've got waning support for team building. A large percentage of employees around the world literally aren't able to meet around the water cooler and chat anymore. And as we've already talked about, social ties are critical to achieving those cultural and business outcomes that we all want to see. So there have to be alternatives to the ways that we've done things in the past. What we do know from our research is that employees working at organizations with integrated recognition have some of the best working relationships with their team members. Recognition has a positive impact on outcomes such as trust, understanding, communication, and collaboration. And it also has a positive impact on business ROI measures such as retention, employee net promoter score, and great work. For example, when employees working on geographically dispersed and multicultural teams experience integrated recognition that also supports social ties, they have 34 times increased odds of retention. And this number is actually a bit higher than the impact for the entire sample. So, depending on the situation, recognition we found can have an amplified positive impact on multicultural and dispersed teams.
Okay, Chris, I'm going to stop you there for a second because this is ringing a bell for me. Now, tell me, how does this connect with the work we did on inclusive teams in the current Global Culture Report?
Yes, thanks for bringing that up. There's actually an important link here. Our chapter on the impact of recognition on multicultural and dispersed teams in particular is actually a bit of an expansion on our inclusive teams chapter from the 2026 GCR. However, in this new report, we're specifically calling out the unique power of recognition to help teams connect and do great work together. All right, believe it or not, we are 2 down and 1 to go. So let's finish strong, Daniel. What's one more theme from the report this year that you think people need to know about?
Okay, well, for me, that would have to be recognition champions. One of the challenges that we found that a lot of organizations have when it comes to really getting the most out of their recognition program is getting beyond just thinking of it as a series of tools and dashboards and awards, and actually getting it to become a regular part of a day-to-day practice. And as we know, again, from research and our clients, for recognition to succeed, it has to become normal behavior, something that's modeled consistently and reinforced socially. And this is actually where champions come in. So, what are recognition champions? They are employees or leaders who advocate for, promote, and model recognition in ways that strengthen workplace relationships. So, again, back to that critical part about relationships. And for me, I like to think of them as kind of part of a culture squad. So they're part role model, part cheerleader, part coach, and their active, visible participation makes recognition feel safer for employees to try. It makes it feel easier to learn and more worth committing to as a regular practice.
This all sounds great to me. And linking it back to what we just talked about, I can totally see how a champion can make a difference when it comes to how teams in particular approach recognition. So another theme that we talk about in the report, but that we don't have time to cover here, is the importance of employees understanding why recognition is important and how to use their programs. And champions can really help with this. Employees need to understand why we're even doing this in the first place and why it's important in order to really get on board with this recognition project. So that being said, what in particular do you think makes for a good champion, Daniel?
Well, we found that the best champions actually really start with just those trusted colleagues. If we think about it, champions should be an embodiment of not just recognition, but also the social connection that is what meaningful recognition is fundamentally all about. So, what are you looking for? Well, the same things you'd be looking for in any meaningful personal connection: approachable, authentic, supportive, and good communication skills. Now, it's also important that recognition champions feel comfortable sharing their own experiences with recognition. So imagine this, Kristen. We're colleagues, not hard to imagine there, and I'm a recognition champion. Now, you and I, we have existing social capital and an existing relationship of trust. So when I share with you how giving recognition impacts how I feel and how it makes me feel connected to others in the company, to company purpose, or to my work, that message is going to more easily resonate with you and hopefully encourage you to participate, to engage, to become more a part of a recognition experience than if somebody in HR, say, randomly sent out an email reminding you to send an e-card to your peers. Now, unfortunately, one of the things that we found in the data was that less than half of the companies out there currently have a champion program. But the good news is those that do actually have a really positive take on its impact. Nearly 90% feel it's effective overall, and 71% say it helps foster a healthy workplace culture. And in fact, 82% of those with champion programs would recommend expanding their program in the future. So for me, the big takeaway here, and again, this ties back into our bigger story of relationships and ROI, but really, those relationships at the heart of it, is that champions make recognition social in a very practical way. When employees see recognition modeled by someone they trust, they learn what good recognition looks like. And as a result, they're quicker to adopt and practice recognition in a consistent, meaningful way. And this participation strengthens relationships, it reinforces culture, and again, importantly, it helps generate those tangible ROIs that organizations want.
All right, folks. So I can't believe it's almost time to wrap this up. Before we go, though, let's see if we can leave you with some key takeaways and actionable next steps. Now that we've given you all this information, where do we go from here? So, Daniel, would you kick us off in that regard?
I'd be happy to. Okay, well, first and foremost, I think if there's one key takeaway, it's that social ties determine ROIs. If companies want to increase employee performance and see production and innovation accelerate, then they have to invest in integrated recognition that builds those powerful workplace relationships. When leaders recognize their people in ways that are frequent, personal, and meaningful, and highlight their investment in the employee's growth and development, employees naturally respond with greater commitment, effort, and loyalty. Platform automations and dashboards are helpful tools for efficiency. Don't get me wrong, but we have to remember that they're not recognition itself. Get beyond recognition that just checks the box and meet your people where they are in ways that are meaningful to them and celebrate the human side of the employee experience, not just outcomes and results. Okay, that's my take. Kristen, what suggestions do you have for us?
Well, thank you for asking. I think if I had one suggestion, it would be to think about recognition as a team building strategy and one that can ultimately help you reach those important ROI goals. We know that recognition from leader to employee has a big impact on things like performance and engagement, but encouraging peer-to-peer recognition can also help increase rapport and build trust on teams. In order to really get the full impact, it needs to not just be always the leader who's recognizing the folks who report to them, but there needs to be some sort of peer-to-peer interaction with recognition as well. Especially in a time when demands are high, team building resources are scarce, utilizing recognition to help foster those connections can really make a big difference. All right, Daniel, anything else? How about one last actionable insight?
You've got it. I would have to say, look to your people for champions that will elevate your recognition program. Now, whether you have a new program that you're trying to socialize and get off the ground, or a long-running program that maybe you need to re-energize and take to that next level, employees that embrace recognition are one of your greatest assets when it comes to building workplace relationships and making recognition a part of your company's way of life. Find those people who are trusted and authentic, train them, support them. Good champions make the social connection of recognition practical, accessible, and desirable.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that really is just a good way to end this because it really emphasizes our main point, which is social ties build ROI.
I love it.
And use recognition as that catalyst. We hope you enjoyed this discussion on the new 2026 State of Employee Recognition Report. The report is available to download now on our website, octanner.com. And with that, thanks for tuning in for this edition of OC Tanner's Culture by Design podcast. See you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of OC Tanner's Culture by Design podcast. OC Tanner is the global leader in software and services that improve workplace culture through meaningful employee recognition experiences. If you want your organization to become a place where people can't wait to come to work in the morning, go to octanner.com.